Listen carefully. International Monetary Fund, World Bank executives, and every Western financial institution that has controlled African economies for decades. Today, the IMF just offered me $6 billion to stay quiet. $6 billion to stop inspiring African resistance and to return to the system of debt and dependency you've perfected over 70 years. I rejected your $6 billion this morning. I stand here with the full support of Burkina Faso's people, with the backing of African nations watching this moment, with the strength of sovereignty that cannot be purchased. You offered $6 billion to buy my silence. Let me explain what just happened. What has every IMF board member in emergency meetings? For decades, you've used loans to control African policy, offered billions in exchange for structural adjustment, provided financing in return for privatization, extended credit contingent on austerity, built an entire system where African nations surrender sovereignty for temporary relief, where presidents accept your conditions to access funds, where governments implement your policies to receive your approval. That system broke this morning. When I rejected $6 billion, I refused to be bought, and I demonstrated that African sovereignty is not for sale at any price. Not just repayment terms, merely interest rates, conditions that would dismantle everything we've built, conditions that would reverse every reform we've implemented, conditions that would restore the exploitation we've ended. The IMF offered $6 billion, but attached to that $6 billion were requirements that would cost us our sovereignty. Privatize state-owned enterprises, sell our national assets to foreign corporations, transfer ownership of strategic industries to private investors. Privatization that would give foreign companies control over our resources, that would allow multinational corporations to dominate our economy, that would surrender our economic sovereignty for short-term cash. Implement austerity measures, cut government spending, reduce public services, eliminate subsidies that help our people, austerity that would harm the poorest Burkina Faso, that would increase poverty while claiming to reduce debt, that would sacrifice our people's welfare for your financial metrics. Open our markets completely, remove all trade barriers, eliminate protections for local industries, allow unrestricted foreign competition, market opening that would destroy our domestic businesses, that would flood our economy with imported goods, that would make us permanently dependent on foreign production. Abandon our gold-backed currency, return to CFA franc dependency, rejoin the monetary system we left, give up the AGS we created, currency surrender that would restore French control over our money, that would eliminate our monetary independence, that would return us to the financial subordination we escaped, end our Pan-African initiatives, stop coordinating with Mali and Niger, abandon the alliance of Sahel states, cease inspiring other African nations to resist. Political isolation that would weaken African unity, that would prevent continental coordination, that would keep us divided and controllable. Not suggestions, not recommendations, conditions, requirements for receiving the $6 billion, terms that would reverse everything we've achieved, demands that would restore the system we've dismantled. The IMF offered $6 billion, but the price was our sovereignty, the cost was our independence, the payment was our submission. I rejected every condition, refused every demand, declined every requirement. Not because $6 billion isn't substantial, not because we don't need development financing, because sovereignty is not negotiable, because independence is not for sale, because freedom cannot be purchased at any price. Listen to every institution that believes African policy can be bought. Listen to every organization that thinks African sovereignty has a price. Your $6 billion offer just proved what I've been saying. That your loans are not assistance, that your financing is not aid, that your support is not partnership. Your loans are control mechanisms. Your financing is dependency creation. Your support is sovereignty surrender. You don't offer money to help African development. You offer money to control African policy. You don't provide loans to reduce African poverty. You provide loans to maintain African subordination. You don't extend credit to support African growth. You extend credit to ensure African compliance. The $6 billion wasn't development assistance. It was a purchase offer. An attempt to buy my silence, a bid to acquire my compliance, an offer to purchase Burkina Faso's return to your system. I'm not for sale. Burkina Faso's sovereignty is not for sale. African independence is not for sale. Not for $6 billion, not for $60 billion, not for any amount. Because some things cannot be purchased, some values cannot be bought, Some principles cannot be compromised. Instead of buying my silence, it proved my point. Instead of purchasing my compliance, it demonstrated your desperation. Instead of acquiring my subordination, it revealed your fear. You're afraid of what's happening in Burkina Faso, afraid of the example we're setting, afraid of the inspiration we're providing, afraid that other African nations will follow our path. We'll reject your loans, we'll refuse your conditions, we'll choose sovereignty over your financing. You're afraid of Pan-African unity, afraid that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso coordinating is just the beginning, afraid that our alliance of Sahel states will expand, afraid that our gold-backed currency will spread, afraid that our resource nationalism will inspire others, afraid that our rejection of your system will become continental movement. You're afraid of African financial independence, afraid that we'll develop without your loans, afraid that we'll grow without your conditions, afraid that we'll prosper without your control, afraid that we'll prove your system isn't necessary, that African development doesn't require IMF supervision, that African growth doesn't need World Bank approval, that African prosperity doesn't depend on Western financial institutions. Your $6 billion offer revealed your fear, and my rejection amplified it, because now every African leader knows that refusing IMF loans is possible, that rejecting their conditions is viable, that choosing sovereignty over their financing is achievable. My rejection just gave every African president permission to say no, just demonstrated that IMF control can be broken, just proved that their system can be escaped. Listen to every president considering IMF loans. Listen to every government negotiating with World Bank. Listen to every nation contemplating their conditions. They just offered me $6 billion to stay quiet. $6 billion to stop inspiring you. $6 billion to abandon Pan-African coordination. $6 billion to return to their system. I said no, and you can say no too. You don't need their loans. You need fair prices for your resources. You don't need their financing. You need control over your minerals. You don't need their assistance. You need sovereignty over your economy. Their loans come with conditions that cost more than the money provides. Their financing comes with requirements that harm more than the funds help. Their assistance comes with terms that subordinate more than the support benefits. When IMF approaches with billions, remember what those billions cost. When World Bank promises development financing, remember what that financing requires. When Western institutions offer assistance, remember what that assistance demands. Reject their offers, not because you don't need resources, because you need sovereignty more. Not because you don't want development, because you want independence more. Not because you don't seek growth, because you seek freedom more. The $6 billion they offered me would have funded infrastructure, would have built schools, would have constructed hospitals, would have developed agriculture. $6 billion is substantial money. Money that could do real good, money that could help real people, money that could support real development. But that $6 billion came with conditions that would have cost us more than the money provided, came with requirements that would have harmed us more than the funds helped, came with terms that would have subordinated us more than the support benefited. I chose independence over temporary relief. I chose freedom over conditional assistance. I chose dignity over purchased development, because sovereignty enables sustainable development, because independence allows genuine growth, because freedom permits real prosperity. The development funded by surrendering sovereignty is false development. The growth achieved by accepting subordination is temporary growth. The prosperity built on dependency is fragile prosperity. Real development comes from controlling your own resources. Real growth comes from setting your own policies. Real prosperity comes from maintaining your sovereignty. I rejected $6 billion because I'm building real development, because I'm creating genuine growth, because I'm establishing sustainable prosperity, development based on sovereignty, growth based on independence, prosperity based on freedom. Listen to every citizen who heard about the $6 billion offer. Listen to everyone wondering if I made the right choice. I rejected $6 billion for you, for your sovereignty, for your independence, for your freedom, for your future. The $6 billion would have provided temporary benefits, would have funded some projects, would have built some infrastructure, would have created some jobs. But the conditions attached would have cost you permanent sovereignty, would have surrendered your independence, would have sacrificed your freedom, would have mortgaged your future. I chose your long-term sovereignty over short-term benefits. I chose your permanent independence over temporary relief. I chose your lasting freedom over conditional assistance. because you deserve development that doesn't cost your sovereignty, because you deserve growth that doesn't require your subordination, because you deserve prosperity that doesn't demand your dependency. The $6 billion would have made some things easier, would have accelerated some projects, would have funded some programs, but it would have made you permanently dependent, would have kept you perpetually subordinate, would have maintained you continually controlled. I refuse to trade your sovereignty for convenience, refuse to exchange your independence for assistance, refuse to sell your freedom for financing. You are descendants of people who resisted colonization. You are inheritors of warriors who fought for freedom. You are children of revolutionaries who died for independence. You deserve leadership that honors that legacy, that protects that inheritance, that continues that struggle. Leadership that refuses to sell what your ancestors died to achieve, that declines to surrender what your forebears fought to gain, that rejects trading what your predecessors sacrificed to secure. I rejected $6 billion because your ancestors didn't fight for independence so I could sell it back for loans, because your forebears didn't resist colonization so I could accept recolonization through debt, because your predecessors didn't die for freedom so I could surrender it for financing. Your sovereignty is not mine to sell. Your independence is not mine to trade. Your freedom is not mine to exchange. I am merely the guardian of what belongs to you, the protector of what your ancestors secured, the defender of what your forebears achieved. Board members are in emergency sessions, executives are developing contingency plans, officials are calculating implications. They're panicking because my rejection changes everything, changes the dynamic, changes the equation, changes the system. For decades, their model worked. Offer loans, attach conditions, control policy. African leaders accepted because they needed the money, because they wanted the financing, because they feared the alternative. The model worked because African leaders always said yes, always accepted conditions, always surrendered sovereignty for loans. I said no, and the model broke. Because if one African president can reject $6 billion, others can too. If one African nation can refuse IMF conditions, others will follow. If one African leader can choose sovereignty over their financing, the entire system of control through debt collapses. They're panicking because they see the future, see Mali rejecting their offers, see Niger refusing their conditions, see other Sahel nations declining their loans, see the alliance of Sahel states coordinating rejection of IMF control, see Pan-African financial independence spreading across the continent, see their entire system of control through debt disintegrating. Control they've maintained for 70 years. Control established after independence when African nations needed development financing. Control perfected through structural adjustment programs. Control exercised through loan conditionality. Control that allowed them to dictate African economic policy, to determine African fiscal priorities, to shape African development strategies. That control is ending. Not gradually, not eventually. Now, today, this moment, ending because I rejected their $6 billion, because I refused their conditions, because I chose sovereignty over their control. The control that kept Africa dependent is breaking. The system that maintained Africa subordinate is collapsing. The mechanism that ensured Africa compliant is failing. My rejection just accelerated the collapse, just hastened the breakdown, just quickened the failure. Every African leader watching knows now that IMF control can be rejected, that their conditions can be refused, that their system can be escaped. Listen to every organization that has controlled African economies through debt. Listen to every institution that has shaped African policy through loans. Listen to every entity that has maintained African dependency through financing. Your system is ending, not because I'm destroying it, because you built it on false foundation. Built it on assumption that African leaders would always prioritize short-term money over long-term sovereignty. Built it on belief that African nations would always choose temporary relief over permanent independence. Built it on conviction that African people would always accept subordination for assistance. Those assumptions were wrong. That belief was false. That conviction was mistaken. African leaders are prioritizing sovereignty. African nations are choosing independence. African people are rejecting subordination. Your system built on those false assumptions is collapsing. Built on that wrong belief is failing. Built on that mistaken conviction is ending. You can offer more money. You can increase the billions. You can raise the offer. Won't matter, because the issue isn't the amount. The issue is the conditions. The issue is the control. The issue is the sovereignty surrender. You can't offer enough money to purchase sovereignty that's not for sale. Can't provide sufficient financing to buy independence that's not for purchase. Can't extend adequate credit to acquire freedom that's not available. You can threaten consequences. You can warn of economic isolation. You can promise financial difficulties. Won't work. Because we've already chosen sovereignty over your money. Already selected independence over your financing. Already picked freedom over your assistance. Your threats of withdrawing what we've already rejected are meaningless. Your warnings about losing what we've already declined are empty. Your promises of consequences we've already accepted are powerless. You can try to make examples. You can attempt to punish Burkina Faso. You can seek to demonstrate costs of rejecting your system. Go ahead, try, punish us, make an example. Every hardship you create will prove our point. Every difficulty you cause will validate our choice. Every consequence you impose will justify our rejection. Because every punishment will demonstrate that your loans weren't assistance but control, that your financing wasn't aid but manipulation, that your support wasn't partnership but domination. Show every African nation what happens when you reject IMF control. Demonstrate every consequence of refusing World Bank conditions. Reveal every cost of choosing sovereignty over their financing. Make us an example. And watch as other African nations see the example and choose the same path, see the consequences and accept the same costs, see the difficulties and make the same choice. Because sovereignty with hardship is better than subordination with assistance. Because independence with challenges is preferable to dependency with support. Because freedom with struggle is superior to control with financing. Your example will backfire, your punishment will inspire, your consequences will motivate. Every African nation watching will see that we survived your rejection, that we prospered despite your opposition, that we developed without your loans, that we grew without your conditions, that we succeeded without your control. And they'll follow. Mali will follow. Niger will follow. Chad will follow. Guinea will follow, one by one, nation by nation, leader by leader, following our example, rejecting your offers, choosing sovereignty over your financing. I am Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, revolutionary who rejected $6 billion, leader who chose sovereignty over IMF financing, president who said no when everyone expected yes, revolutionary who broke the system everyone thought was permanent, leader who demonstrated that IMF control can be rejected. I am Ibrahim Traoré, not the first African leader to resist Western financial control, but perhaps the first to reject $6 billion so publicly, so definitively, so completely. I am the president who said no to the largest offer, the leader who refused the biggest bribe, the revolutionary who declined the most substantial purchase attempt. To purchase my compliance, to acquire my subordination, to stop my inspiration of other African leaders, to end my Pan-African coordination, to terminate my resistance to their system. $6 billion, not small money, not insignificant financing, not trivial offer. $6 billion that could fund real development, that could build real infrastructure, that could support real programs. $6 billion that came with conditions that would cost more than the money provided, that came with requirements that would harm more than the funds helped, that came with terms that would subordinate more than the support benefited. I said no, not because I don't want development, because I want sovereign development, not because I don't need financing, because I need independent financing, not because I don't seek assistance, because I seek partnership assistance, not control assistance. I said no to $6 billion, said no to their conditions, said no to their control, said no to their system. Changed the dynamic between IMF and Africa, changed the relationship between Western financial institutions and African nations, changed the system of control through debt. My no demonstrated that their offers can be rejected, that their conditions can be refused, that their control can be broken. My no gave permission to every African leader to say no, gave courage to every African nation to reject their offers, gave inspiration to every African people to demand sovereignty over financing. The no that they tried to prevent with $6 billion, the no that they attempted to purchase with massive offer, the no that they sought to avoid with unprecedented financing, that no happened anyway. Despite their offer, despite their billions, despite their attempt to buy silence, the no happened, and it changed everything. Not might end, not could end, not will end eventually, is ending, right now, this moment. the age where African nations accept any conditions for financing, where African leaders surrender sovereignty for loans, where African people accept subordination for assistance. That age is ending. Guinea will choose sovereignty. The era I'm beginning will transform Africa, will end debt dependency, will establish financial sovereignty, will create genuine independence. And no amount of increased offers, threatened consequences, or attempted isolation will change what I've done. Your increased offers will fail because the issue isn't amount but conditions. Your threatened consequences will backfire because they'll prove our point. Your attempted isolation will fail because we're building Pan-African alternatives. What I've done cannot be undone, cannot be reversed, cannot be changed. I rejected $6 billion. I refused IMF control. I chose sovereignty over their financing. That choice is permanent. That rejection is final. That refusal is irreversible. We rejected $6 billion. We refused IMF conditions. We chose sovereignty over their financing. We are Burkina Faso, not the wealthiest African nation, not the largest African economy, not the most powerful African country, but the nation that said no to $6 billion, the economy that rejected IMF control, the country that chose sovereignty over Western financing. We rejected $6 billion. Let that number settle in your mind. $6 billion. $6,000 million. Money that could build hundreds of hospitals. Money that could construct thousands of schools. Money that could pave tens of thousands of kilometers of roads. Money that could provide clean water to millions of people. Money that could electrify entire regions. Money that could transform infrastructure across our nation. $6 billion. More money than most African nations see in a decade. More financing than most governments can imagine accessing. More resources than most economies can dream of receiving. $6 billion offered to us. Presented to our government. Extended to our nation. And we rejected it. Said no to it. Refused it completely. We refused IMF conditions. Not just the money. The conditions attached to that money. The requirements bundled with that financing. The demands packaged with that offer. Conditions that would have dismantled our sovereignty piece by piece. Requirements that would have surrendered our independence step by step. Demands that would have sacrificed our freedom policy by policy. We refused their conditions to privatize our state enterprises, to sell our national assets to foreign corporations, to transfer ownership of strategic industries to multinational companies, to auction off what belongs to Burkinabe people to the highest foreign bidder. We refused their conditions to implement austerity measures that would cut government spending on health, on education, on social services, on the programs that help our poorest citizens. Austerity that would balance budgets by starving people. That would reduce debt by increasing poverty. That would satisfy their metrics by destroying our communities. We refused their conditions to open our markets completely, to remove all protections for local industries, to eliminate all barriers to foreign competition, to allow unrestricted import of goods that would destroy our domestic production, market opening that would kill our local businesses, that would bankrupt our small manufacturers, that would eliminate our agricultural producers, that would make us permanently dependent on foreign goods, permanently reliant on imported products, permanently subordinate to external suppliers. We refuse their conditions to abandon our gold-backed currency, to return to the CFA franc system, to rejoin the monetary arrangement that gave France control over our money, to surrender the AGS we created with our own gold, with our own resources, with our own sovereignty, currency surrender that would restore colonial monetary control. That would eliminate our financial independence. That would return us to the subordination we escaped. We refused their conditions to end our Pan-African initiatives, to stop coordinating with Mali and Niger, to abandon the alliance of Sahel states we built, to cease inspiring other African nations to resist their system, political isolation that would weaken continental unity, that would prevent regional coordination, that would keep African nations divided and controllable, divided and exploitable, divided and subordinate. We refused every single condition, every single requirement, every single demand. Not because we're irrational, not because we're stubborn, not because we're foolish, because we understand what those conditions cost, because we recognize what those requirements demand, because we comprehend what those demands sacrifice. We refused IMF conditions because accepting them would cost us more than $6 billion could ever provide. We chose sovereignty over their financing, made a deliberate choice, a conscious decision, an intentional selection, chose sovereignty that gives us control over our own economic policy, that allows us to set our own development priorities, that permits us to determine our own national direction, sovereignty that lets us decide what's best for Burkinabe people, that enables us to pursue what serves Burkinabe interests, that allows us to implement what advances Burkinabe prosperity. We chose sovereignty over financing that would have come with strings attached, with conditions imposed, with requirements mandated, with control embedded, with subordination guaranteed. Financing that would have temporarily eased some pressures while permanently surrendering our independence. That would have provided short-term relief while ensuring long-term dependency. That would have offered immediate assistance while guaranteeing perpetual subordination. We chose sovereignty, chose independence, chose freedom, chose dignity, chose self-determination, chose the ability to make our own decisions, to set our own policies, to determine our own future. We chose sovereignty over their financing, and that choice defines who we are. That decision demonstrates what we value. That selection proves what we prioritize. We chose sovereignty, and we will never regret that choice, never question that decision, never doubt that selection. We are Burkina Faso, not the wealthiest African nation, not by GDP, not by per capita income, not by foreign reserves, not by any financial metric that international institutions use to rank economies. We're not the wealthiest. We know that. We acknowledge that. We accept that. Our wealth is not measured in dollars accumulated, not calculated in resources extracted, not quantified in exports generated. Our wealth is measured differently, in sovereignty maintained, in independence preserved, in freedom protected, in dignity upheld, in self-determination exercised. That's our wealth. That's our treasure. That's our value. Not the largest African economy. Not by size. Not by output. Not by production. Not by consumption. Not by any measure of economic scale. We're not the largest. We understand that. We recognize that. We embrace that. Our size is not our strength. Our scale is not our power. Our magnitude is not our significance. Our strength comes from our courage. Our power comes from our determination. Our significance comes from our principles, from our willingness to stand for what's right, to fight for what's just, to sacrifice for what's necessary. Our economy may be modest in size, but our commitment to sovereignty is immense. Our dedication to independence is enormous. Our devotion to freedom is massive. Not the most powerful African country, not by military strength, not by political influence, not by diplomatic reach, not by any conventional measure of national power. We're not the most powerful. We don't claim to be. We don't pretend to be. We don't aspire to be. Our power is not measured in weapons possessed, not calculated in troops deployed, not quantified in alliances formed. Our power is measured differently, in principles upheld, in sovereignty defended, in independence maintained, in freedom protected, in justice pursued. That's our power. That's our strength. That's our capability. We may not have the largest military, but we have the strongest conviction. We may not have the most influence, but we have the clearest vision. We may not have the greatest reach, but we have the deepest commitment. But the nation that said no to $6 billion, that's who we are. That's what defines us. That's what distinguishes us. The nation that said no when everyone expected yes. The nation that refused when everyone anticipated acceptance. The nation that rejected when everyone predicted compliance. We said no to $6 billion. Not because we don't need money. Not because we don't want development. Not because we don't seek progress. But because we understand that some things cost more than money can buy. That some sacrifices are too great for any price. That some surrenders are too permanent for any temporary benefit. We said no to $6 billion. And that no echoes across Africa. That refusal resonates throughout the continent. That rejection inspires across the region. The economy that rejected IMF control. That's our identity. That's our distinction. That's our contribution. The economy that looked at their control mechanisms and said no. That examined their debt traps and refused. That analyzed their conditionality and rejected. We rejected IMF control, not partially, not conditionally, not temporarily, completely, absolutely, permanently, rejected their control over our fiscal policy, over our monetary policy, over our trade policy, over our investment policy, over our development strategy, over our economic direction, rejected their control over everything, over every aspect of our economic sovereignty, over every element of our financial independence, over every component of our monetary freedom. The country that chose sovereignty over Western financing, that's our legacy, that's our example, that's our inspiration. The country that valued sovereignty more than money, that prioritized independence over financing, that selected freedom over assistance, that preferred dignity over support, that chose self-determination over aid. We chose sovereignty over Western financing, made that choice consciously, made that decision deliberately, made that selection intentionally, chose sovereignty knowing the costs, understanding the challenges, recognizing the difficulties, but choosing it anyway, choosing it because it's right, choosing it because it's necessary, choosing it because it's who we are. We are Burkina Faso, small nation, big courage, limited resources, unlimited determination, modest economy, immense sovereignty. We are Burkina Faso. And we just changed the relationship between Africa and Western financial institutions, just demonstrated that their control can be rejected, just proved that their system can be escaped, just showed that sovereignty is achievable despite their opposition. We are Burkina Faso, small nation. Our territory is not vast, our population is not enormous, our land is not expansive. We're small by geographic measures, by demographic statistics, by territorial extent. Small nation. But size is not destiny, scale is not fate, magnitude is not determination. Small nations can make big impacts, can create significant change, can generate substantial influence, can inspire continental movements, can challenge global systems, can transform international relationships. We're a small nation. But we're proving that small nations can do great things, can achieve remarkable results, can accomplish extraordinary outcomes. Small nation, but with vision that's large, with courage that's immense, with determination that's unlimited. Big courage, that's what defines us, that's what distinguishes us, that's what empowers us. Courage to say no to $6 billion, courage to refuse IMF conditions, courage to reject Western financial control, courage to choose sovereignty over money, courage to select independence over financing, courage to prefer freedom over assistance. Big courage, not reckless bravery, not foolish boldness, not irrational fearlessness, but calculated courage, informed bravery, principled boldness, courage based on understanding, based on analysis, based on conviction, courage that knows the costs but accepts them, that recognizes the challenges but faces them, that understands the difficulties but overcomes them. Big courage, the courage to be different, to stand alone, to resist pressure, to reject convention, to challenge systems, to transform relationships. Big courage that inspires others, that encourages resistance, that motivates independence, that promotes sovereignty. Limited resources. We acknowledge this reality, we recognize this fact, we accept this truth. Our natural resources are not the most abundant, our mineral wealth is not the greatest, our financial reserves are not the largest, our economic capacity is not the strongest. Limited resources. But resources are not everything. Wealth is not destiny. Abundance is not determination. Nations with limited resources can achieve unlimited success, can accomplish remarkable development, can generate substantial prosperity, can create significant progress. Limited resources, but we're using what we have wisely, strategically, effectively, using our resources to build sovereignty, to establish independence, to create freedom, to develop self-reliance, to generate self-sufficiency. Limited resources, but unlimited creativity in using them, unlimited innovation in deploying them, unlimited effectiveness in leveraging them, unlimited determination. That's our strength, that's our power, that's our advantage. Determination to maintain sovereignty regardless of pressure, determination to preserve independence despite opposition, determination to protect freedom against threats, determination to uphold dignity in face of challenges, determination to exercise self-determination against resistance, unlimited determination, not temporary resolve, not conditional commitment, not situational dedication, but permanent determination. absolute commitment, unconditional dedication, determination that doesn't weaken with time, that doesn't diminish with pressure, that doesn't fade with opposition, unlimited determination, to build Burkina Faso on our own terms, to develop our economy according to our priorities, to advance our nation following our vision, to create our future based on our values. Unlimited determination that cannot be bought, cannot be intimidated, cannot be discouraged, cannot be defeated. Modest economy. We don't deny this. We don't hide this. We don't pretend otherwise. Our GDP is not the largest. Our economic output is not the greatest. Our production capacity is not the strongest. Our consumption level is not the highest. Modest economy. But modesty is not weakness. Small size is not insignificance. Limited scale is not irrelevance. Modest economies can make major impacts, can create significant changes, can generate substantial influences, can inspire continental movements, can challenge global systems, can transform international relationships. Modest economy. But we're building it on solid foundation, on sovereign control, on independent policy, on free decision-making, on dignified relationships, on self-determined direction. Modest economy. But it's ours, controlled by us, managed by us, developed by us, for our people, for our interests, for our future. Immense sovereignty. That's our treasure. That's our wealth. That's our value. Sovereignty over our economic policy, over our fiscal decisions, over our monetary system, over our trade relationships, over our investment priorities, over our development strategy. Immense sovereignty, complete control, total independence, absolute freedom. Full self-determination, unrestricted decision-making, sovereignty that's not theoretical, not nominal, not partial, but real, actual, complete. Sovereignty that we exercise daily, that we defend constantly, that we protect permanently. Immense sovereignty, worth more than $6 billion, worth more than $60 billion, worth more than any amount of money, because sovereignty is priceless, because independence is invaluable, because freedom is beyond measure. We are Burkina Faso, and we just changed the relationship between Africa and Western financial institutions, changed it fundamentally, changed it permanently, changed it irreversibly. For decades, that relationship was based on dependency. African nations needed financing. Western institutions provided it, with conditions attached, with control embedded, with subordination guaranteed. That was the relationship. That was the system. That was the arrangement. We just changed it. Changed it by saying no, by refusing conditions, by rejecting control, by choosing sovereignty. We changed the relationship, demonstrated that it doesn't have to be based on dependency, doesn't have to include subordination, doesn't have to involve control, can be based on equality, can include respect, can involve partnership. We changed the relationship, not just for Burkina Faso, for all of Africa, for every African nation watching, for every African leader learning, for every African people hoping. Just demonstrated that their control can be rejected, demonstrated it practically, demonstrated it publicly, demonstrated it successfully. Their control that seemed permanent, that appeared unbreakable, that looked inevitable. We demonstrated it can be rejected, can be refused, can be ended. Demonstrated that African nations don't have to accept IMF conditions, don't have to implement World Bank requirements, don't have to surrender to Western financial institution demands, can say no, can refuse, can reject, can choose sovereignty instead, can select independence instead, can prefer freedom instead. We demonstrated that their control can be rejected, and in demonstrating we empowered other African nations to consider rejection, empowered other African leaders to contemplate refusal, empowered other African people to demand sovereignty. Just proved that their system can be escaped, proved it definitively, proved it conclusively, proved it undeniably. Their system that trapped so many African nations, that ensnared so many African economies, that captured so many African governments, their system of debt and dependency, of loans and conditions, of financing and control. We proved it can be escaped, can be left, can be abandoned. Proved that African nations can develop without IMF loans, can grow without World Bank financing, can prosper without Western financial institution assistance, can succeed through sovereign policies, through independent strategies, through free decisions. We proved that their system can be escaped, And in proving, we inspired other African nations to attempt escape, inspired other African leaders to pursue independence, inspired other African people to demand sovereignty, just showed that sovereignty is achievable despite their opposition, showed it clearly, showed it powerfully, showed it convincingly, sovereignty that they said was impossible, that they claimed was unrealistic, that they insisted was unachievable. We showed it's achievable, despite their opposition, despite their pressure, despite their threats, despite their warnings, despite their predictions. We achieved sovereignty, maintained sovereignty, protected sovereignty, despite everything they did to prevent it, despite every obstacle they created, despite every difficulty they imposed. We showed that sovereignty is achievable, and in showing we motivated other African nations to pursue sovereignty, motivated other African leaders to choose independence, motivated other African people to demand freedom. We have our sovereignty, not sold for $6 billion, not traded for IMF loans, not exchanged for World Bank financing. Our sovereignty that we fought for, that we died for, that we sacrificed for. Our sovereignty that belongs to our people, that serves our interests, that protects our future. Our sovereignty that is not for sale, not for $6 billion, not for $60 billion, not for any amount. We have our sovereignty. We're keeping our sovereignty. We're protecting our sovereignty. Not sold for $6 billion. They offered to buy it. Offered $6 billion for our sovereignty. $6 billion to surrender our independence. $6 billion to sacrifice our freedom. $6 billion to abandon our self-determination. They offered to buy our sovereignty. We refused to sell it, refused absolutely, refused permanently, refused completely. Not sold for $6 billion. Because sovereignty is not merchandise. Independence is not commodity. Freedom is not product. Dignity is not goods. Self-determination is not item for sale. These things cannot be sold, cannot be purchased, cannot be traded, cannot be exchanged, not for $6 billion, not for any amount. Our sovereignty is not for sale, never was, never will be, never can be. Not traded for IMF loans. They offered to trade, offered their loans for our sovereignty, offered their financing for our independence, offered their assistance for our freedom, offered their support for our self-determination. They offered to trade. We refused the trade, refused the exchange, refused the swap, refused the transaction. Not traded for IMF loans, because sovereignty cannot be traded for temporary financing. Independence cannot be exchanged for conditional assistance. Freedom cannot be swapped for controlled support. Dignity cannot be transacted for subordinating aid. These things are permanent. Loans are temporary. These things are unconditional. Assistance comes with conditions. These things are sovereign. Support includes control. Not traded for IMF loans. Not traded for anything. Our sovereignty is not tradable. Our independence is not exchangeable. Our freedom is not swappable. Not exchanged for World Bank financing. They offered to exchange. Offered their development financing for our economic sovereignty. Offered their project funding for our policy independence. Offered their program support for our strategic freedom. Offered their institutional assistance for our decision-making autonomy. They offered to exchange. We refused the exchange, declined the swap, rejected the trade, turned down the transaction, not exchanged for World Bank financing, because sovereignty cannot be exchanged for development projects. Independence cannot be swapped for funded programs. Freedom cannot be traded for supported initiatives. Self-determination cannot be transacted for financed activities. These things are foundational. Projects are temporary. These things are comprehensive. Programs are limited. These things are permanent. Initiatives are finite. Not exchanged for World Bank financing. Not exchanged for anything. Our sovereignty is not exchangeable. Period. Our sovereignty that we fought for through decades of resistance, through years of struggle, through generations of sacrifice, fought for against colonialism, against imperialism, against neocolonialism, against exploitation, against subordination, against control, fought for with blood of our ancestors, with sacrifice of our forebears, with courage of our heroes, with determination of our martyrs. Our sovereignty that we fought for, not given to us, not granted to us, not bestowed upon us, fought for, earned, won, achieved through struggle, through sacrifice, through suffering, through persistence, through resistance, through determination. our sovereignty that we fought for. We're not surrendering what was fought for, not abandoning what was struggled for, not selling what was sacrificed for, not trading what was earned, not exchanging what was won, that we died for in wars of independence, in battles for freedom, in struggles for sovereignty, in fights for self-determination, died for in colonial resistance, in anti-imperial movements, in liberation struggles, in independence campaigns. Our ancestors died for this sovereignty. Our forebears sacrificed their lives for this independence. Our heroes gave their blood for this freedom. Our martyrs offered their existence for this self-determination that we died for, not metaphorically, literally, actually, really. People died, lives were lost, blood was shed, sacrifice was made for this sovereignty, for this independence, for this freedom, for this self-determination that we died for. We're not selling what people died for, not trading what lives were lost for, not exchanging what blood was shed for, not surrendering what sacrifice was made for. That we sacrificed for, sacrificed comfort for, sacrificed prosperity for, sacrificed ease for, sacrificed convenience for, sacrificed relationships for, sacrificed opportunities for, sacrificed everything for. Sovereignty required sacrifice, independence demanded sacrifice, freedom necessitated sacrifice, self-determination mandated sacrifice, sacrifice of economic comfort, sacrifice of political ease, sacrifice of diplomatic convenience, sacrifice of international acceptance, sacrifice of Western approval, sacrifice of financial assistance. We sacrificed for sovereignty, sacrificed willingly, sacrificed consciously, sacrificed deliberately, that we sacrificed for. We're not abandoning what we sacrificed for, not surrendering what we gave up comfort for, not selling what we traded prosperity for, not exchanging what we offered everything for. Our sovereignty that belongs to our people, not to government, not to leaders, not to officials, to our people, to Burkina Faso citizens, to every man, woman, and child in Burkina Faso. Sovereignty that belongs to them, that is theirs, that is their inheritance, that is their birthright, that is their legacy. Our sovereignty that belongs to our people, not mine to sell, not governments to trade, not leaders to exchange, not officials to surrender, because it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the people, to all the people, to current generation and future generations, to those living and those yet to be born. Our sovereignty that belongs to our people, we're protecting what belongs to them, defending what is theirs, preserving what they inherited, securing what they will pass on. That serves our interests, not Western interests, not IMF interests, not World Bank interests, not foreign interests, our interests, Burkina Faso interests, African interests, interests of our people, interests of our nation, interests of our continent. Sovereignty that serves our interests, allows us to pursue our priorities, enables us to advance our goals, permits us to achieve our objectives, empowers us to realize our vision. Sovereignty that serves our interests in economic development, in social progress, in political stability, in cultural preservation, in national security, in regional cooperation, in continental unity. Sovereignty that serves our interests, not theirs, ours, always ours, only ours. That protects our future, not just our present, our future, future of our children, future of our grandchildren, future of generations yet unborn. Sovereignty that protects our future, ensures we can develop on our own terms, guarantees we can grow according to our priorities, secures we can prosper following our vision, safeguards we can succeed based on our values. Sovereignty that protects our future, from dependency, from subordination, from control, from exploitation, from neocolonialism, from any form of domination. Sovereignty that protects our future, permanently, completely, absolutely. That's what we're protecting, that's what we're defending, that's what we're preserving, our future, our children's future, our nation's future, our continent's future, our sovereignty that is not for sale, not for $6 billion, not for $6 billion that could build infrastructure, that could fund programs, that could support projects, that could develop capacity, that could create opportunities, not for $6 billion, because sovereignty is worth more, independence is worth more, freedom is worth more, dignity is worth more, self-determination is worth more. Our sovereignty that is not for sale, not for 60 billion, not for 10 times the offer, not for 100 times the offer, not for any multiple of any offer, not for 60 billion, not for 600 billion, not for 6 trillion, not for any amount, because sovereignty is priceless, cannot be priced, cannot be valued, cannot be quantified, cannot be measured in money. Not for any amount, not for the largest offer imaginable, not for the most generous financing conceivable, not for the most attractive assistance possible, not for any amount. Because some things are beyond price, some values transcend money, some principles exceed financial calculation, some commitments supersede economic consideration. Sovereignty is one of those things. Independence is one of those values. Freedom is one of those principles. Self-determination is one of those commitments. Not for any amount. Our sovereignty is not for sale, never was for sale, never will be for sale, never can be for sale, because it's not ours to sell. It belongs to our people. It's not merchandise. It's our identity. It's not commodity. It's our dignity. It's not product. It's our future. We have our sovereignty, present tense, current reality, existing fact. We have it. We possess it. We control it. We exercise it. We maintain it. We defend it. We protect it. We have our sovereignty. Right now, this moment, today, tomorrow, forever. We have our sovereignty in economic policy, in fiscal decisions, in monetary system, in trade relationships, in investment priorities, in development strategy, in every aspect of national life, in every dimension of government function, in every element of state authority. We have our sovereignty, complete sovereignty, total sovereignty, absolute sovereignty, unrestricted sovereignty, unconditional sovereignty. We have our sovereignty. We're keeping our sovereignty, not temporarily, permanently, not conditionally, absolutely, not partially, completely. We're keeping our sovereignty, despite pressure to surrender it, despite offers to buy it, despite threats to take it, despite warnings about protecting it, despite predictions about maintaining it. We're keeping our sovereignty, no matter what they offer, no matter what they threaten, no matter what they promise, no matter what they predict, no matter what they do. We're keeping our sovereignty because it's ours, because we fought for it, because we died for it, because we sacrificed for it, because it belongs to our people, because it serves our interests, because it protects our future. We're keeping our sovereignty today, tomorrow, forever. We're protecting our sovereignty, actively protecting, deliberately defending, consciously preserving, intentionally securing, constantly guarding. We're protecting our sovereignty from external threats, from foreign pressure, from institutional control, from financial manipulation, from economic coercion, from political interference, from any form of domination. We're protecting our sovereignty with our military, with our government, with our institutions, with our people, with our determination, with our courage, with our commitment. We're protecting our sovereignty because it's precious, because it's valuable, because it's essential, because it's fundamental, because it's everything. We're protecting our sovereignty now and always, here and everywhere, against all threats, against all challenges, against all opposition. We control our economic policy, not IMF, not World Bank, not Western financial institutions. Us. We control our economic policy. We decide fiscal priorities. We determine monetary policy. We establish trade relationships. We set investment strategies. We define development goals. We control our economic policy through our government, through our institutions, through our democratic processes, through our sovereign authority, through our national power, through our independent decision-making. We control our economic policy completely. We set every priority, absolutely. We make every decision, permanently. We determine every direction. We control our economic policy, not them, us, only us, always us. Not IMF. They don't control our economic policy. They don't set our fiscal priorities. They don't determine our monetary policy. They don't establish our trade relationships. They don't define our investment strategies. They don't dictate our development goals. Not IMF. They used to try. They used to attempt. They used to seek. Through loan conditionality, through structural adjustment, through policy requirements, through technical assistance, through institutional pressure. They used to try to control. We stopped them. We rejected their control. We refused their conditions. We decline their requirements. We turn down their demands. Not IMF. They don't control our economic policy. Not anymore. Not ever again. Never again. Not World Bank. They don't control our economic policy. They don't dictate our development strategy. They don't mandate our project priorities. They don't require our policy reforms. They don't demand our institutional changes. They don't impose their development model. Not World Bank. They used to influence. They used to shape. They used to direct. Through development financing, through project funding, through program support, through technical assistance, through institutional engagement, they used to influence our policy. We ended that influence. We rejected their direction. We refused their shaping. We declined their dictation. We turned down their imposition. Not World Bank. They don't control our economic policy. Not anymore. Not ever again. Never again. Not Western financial institutions. They don't control our economic policy. They don't determine our fiscal direction. They don't establish our monetary framework. They don't set our trade parameters. They don't define our investment criteria. They don't dictate our development pathway. Not Western financial institutions. Not IMF. Not World Bank. Not any of them. Not their consortium. Not their coordination. Not their collective pressure. Not Western financial institutions. They used to control African economic policy. Used to determine African fiscal direction, used to establish African monetary frameworks, used to set African trade parameters, used to define African investment criteria, used to dictate African development pathways. They used to control. We ended that control. For Burkina Faso, we ended it completely, permanently, absolutely. Us. We control our economic policy. Burkinabe government, Burkinabe institutions, Burkinabe people, Burkinabe sovereignty. Us. We make the decisions. We set the priorities. We determine the direction. We establish the framework. We define the strategy. We control everything. Us. Not foreigners. Not international institutions. Not Western powers. Not external forces. Not anyone else. Us. Only us. Always us. Forever us. We control our economic policy. And that control is sovereignty. That control is independence. That control is freedom. That control is self-determination. That control is dignity. We control our economic policy. Us. We control our fiscal priorities. We decide government spending. We determine budget allocation. We establish revenue collection. We set expenditure priorities. We define fiscal balance. We control our fiscal priorities. Not IMF dictating austerity. Not World Bank mandating spending cuts. Not Western institutions requiring budget restructuring. Us. We control our fiscal priorities. We decide to spend on health, on education, on infrastructure, on social services, on agriculture, on security, on whatever serves our people, whatever advances our interests, whatever protects our future. We control our fiscal priorities completely. We make every spending decision, absolutely. We determine every allocation, permanently. We establish every priority. We control our fiscal priorities. We control our development strategies. We determine development goals. We establish development priorities. We define development pathways. We set development timelines. We choose development models. We control our development strategies. Not IMF imposing their development model. Not World Bank mandating their development framework. Not Western institutions requiring their development approach. Us. We control our development strategies. We choose strategies that serve our people, that advance our interests, that reflect our values, that suit our circumstances, that address our challenges, that leverage our opportunities. We control our development strategies, strategies based on sovereignty, on independence, on self-reliance, on self-sufficiency, on self-determination. We control our development strategies. We control our monetary policy. We determine currency value. We establish interest rates. We set money supply. We define exchange rates. We manage inflation. We control our monetary policy. Not France controlling through CFA franc. Not IMF dictating through loan conditions. Not Western institutions influencing through pressure. Us. We control our monetary policy. Through our gold-backed currency. Through our sovereign monetary system. Through our independent central bank. Through our national monetary authority. Through our sovereign monetary power. We control our monetary policy. Completely. We make every monetary decision. Absolutely. We determine every monetary direction. Permanently. We establish every monetary framework. We control our monetary policy. We control our trade policy. We determine trade relationships. We establish trade agreements. We set tariff rates. We define trade barriers. We choose trade partners. We control our trade policy. Not IMF requiring trade liberalization. Not World Bank mandating market opening. Not Western institutions demanding unrestricted access. Us. We control our trade policy. We protect domestic industries when necessary. We open markets when beneficial. We establish partnerships when advantageous. We set barriers when protective. We choose relationships when valuable. We control our trade policy. Policy that serves our interests, that protects our industries, that develops our economy, that advances our prosperity, that ensures our sovereignty. We control our trade policy. We control our investment policy. We determine investment priorities. We establish investment criteria. We set investment regulations. We define investment incentives. We choose investment partners. We control our investment policy. Not IMF requiring investment liberalization. Not World Bank mandating privatization. Not Western institutions demanding foreign ownership. Us. We control our investment policy. We prioritize investments that create jobs, that transfer technology, that build capacity, that develop infrastructure, that serve our people. We control our investment policy. Policy that ensures majority national ownership, that requires local employment, that mandates technology transfer, that demands infrastructure development, that protects national interests. We control our investment policy. We control everything, every aspect of economic policy, every dimension of fiscal policy, every element of monetary policy, every component of trade policy, every facet of investment policy, every part of development strategy. We control everything through sovereign authority, authority that comes from our independence, that derives from our freedom, that stems from our self-determination, that originates from our people, that rests on our sovereignty. Through sovereign authority, we exercise that authority, we implement that authority, we defend that authority, we protect that authority, we maintain that authority. Through sovereign authority, through national power, power that comes from our unity, that derives from our determination, that stems from our courage, that originates from our commitment, that rests on our sovereignty. Through national power, we exercise that power, we deploy that power, we utilize that power, we leverage that power, we maintain that power. Through national power, power that is real, that is actual, that is effective, that is demonstrated, that is proven. Through national power, through democratic right, right that comes from our people, that derives from their sovereignty, that stems from their authority, that originates from their power, that rests on their will. Through democratic right, we exercise that right, we implement that right, we defend that right, we protect that right, we maintain that right. Through democratic right, right that is legitimate, that is legal, that is constitutional, that is democratic, that is sovereign. Through democratic right, through independence earned, independence that was fought for, that was died for, that was sacrificed for, that was struggled for, that was won. Through independence earned, we exercise that independence, we implement that independence, we defend that independence, we protect that independence, we maintain that independence. Through independence earned, independence that is real, that is complete, that is total, that is absolute, that is permanent. Through independence earned, we control our economic policy completely, not partially, not conditionally, not temporarily, completely. Every aspect, every dimension, every element, every component, every facet, every part, completely. Total control, complete control, full control, absolute control, unrestricted control, unconditional control. We control our economic policy completely, absolutely, not relatively, not comparatively, not conditionally, absolutely, without qualification, without limitation, without restriction, without condition, without exception, absolutely, pure control, perfect control, total control, complete control, absolute control. We control our economic policy absolutely. permanently, not temporarily, not conditionally, not provisionally, permanently, forever, always, continuously, constantly, perpetually, permanently, lasting control, enduring control, permanent control, eternal control, everlasting control. We control our economic policy, permanently. We set our own terms, not accept IMF conditions, not follow World Bank requirements, not implement Western financial institution demands. We set our own terms for our development, for our growth, for our prosperity, terms based on our interests, our needs, our priorities, our sovereignty, terms that serve our people, that build our economy, that strengthen our nation, that secure our future. We set the terms, not them, not anymore, not ever again. Not accept IMF conditions. We don't accept them. We don't implement them. We don't follow them. We don't comply with them. We don't submit to them. Not accept IMF conditions. Conditions that require austerity, that mandate privatization, that demand liberalization, that impose deregulation, that require structural adjustment. Not accept IMF conditions. We reject them. We refuse them. We decline them. We turn them down. We say no to them. Not accept IMF conditions. Not now. Not ever. Not under any circumstances. Not for any amount of money. Not for any level of financing. Not accept IMF conditions. Not follow World Bank requirements. We don't follow them. We don't implement them. We don't comply with them. We don't submit to them. We don't conform to them. Not follow World Bank requirements. Requirements that mandate specific policies, that demand particular reforms, that impose certain changes, that require predetermined outcomes, that dictate prescribed approaches. Not follow World Bank requirements. We reject them. We refuse them. We decline them. We turn them down. We say no to them. Not follow World Bank requirements. Not now. Not ever. Not under any circumstances. Not for any level of project funding. Not for any amount of development financing. Not follow World Bank requirements. Not implement Western financial institution demands. We don't implement them. We don't execute them. We don't carry them out. We don't put them into practice. We don't make them real. Not implement Western financial institution demands. Demands that would surrender our sovereignty, that would sacrifice our independence, that would compromise our freedom, that would undermine our self-determination, that would weaken our dignity. Not implement Western financial institution demands. We reject them. We refuse them. We decline them. We turn them down. We say no to them. Not implement Western financial institution demands. Not now. Not ever. Not under any circumstances. Not for any promises made. Not for any threats issued. Not implement Western financial institution demands. We set our own terms, not theirs, not IMF's, not World Bank's, not Western financial institutions, our terms, Burkina Faso terms, African terms, sovereign terms, independent terms, free terms. We set our own terms, terms we determine, terms we establish, terms we define, terms we create, terms we impose. We set our own terms. Not negotiate them as subordinate, not discuss them as inferior, not compromise them as weak. We set them, we establish them, we impose them, we set our own terms for our development, development that serves our people, that advances our interests, that reflects our priorities, that suits our circumstances, that addresses our challenges, that leverages our opportunities for our development, development based on sovereignty, on independence, on self-reliance, on self-sufficiency, on self-determination, for our development, development that is sustainable, that is equitable, that is inclusive, that is comprehensive, that is transformative, for our development, not their version of development, not their model of development, not their approach to development, our development, for our growth, growth that benefits our people, that strengthens our economy, that expands our capacity, that increases our capability, that enhances our prosperity, for our growth, growth based on sovereignty, on independence, on self-reliance, on self-sufficiency, on self-determination, for our growth, growth that is sustainable, that is equitable, that is inclusive, that is broad-based, that is transformative, for our growth, not their version of growth, not their model of growth, not their approach to growth, our growth. for our growth, for our prosperity, prosperity that enriches our people, that improves our lives, that enhances our well-being, that increases our opportunities, that expands our potential, for our prosperity, prosperity based on sovereignty, on independence, on self-reliance, on self-sufficiency, on self-determination, for our prosperity, prosperity that is sustainable, that is equitable, that is inclusive, that is comprehensive, that is lasting, for our prosperity, not their version of prosperity, not their model of prosperity, not their approach to prosperity, our prosperity, for our prosperity,